This is Omar Nashashibi in Washington, D.C., where we continue to see trade developments despite everyone here in town focusing on debt ceiling negotiations. Let's start with the Section 301 tariffs on over 10,000 imports coming in from China, which face a tariff of either a 25% rate or 7.5%. When former President Trump imposed the tariffs, that administration created what is called an exclusion process, which allows importers to petition the office of the U.S. Trade Representative and request a temporary exclusion from having to pay the tariff on that import. The Trump administration imposed 25% tariffs on three lists, lists 1, 2, and 3, but on list 4A, they placed a 7.5% tariff on roughly 3,200 Chinese goods. Through January 2020, the USTR granted 13% of the over 52,000 new exclusion requests it received from importers, rejecting 87%. That was not the case, though, early on. The USTR approved roughly 35% of new requests under List 1 and 2, but that approval rate dropped to only 5% for List 3 and 7% for List 4A, the one with a 7.5% rate. The vast majority of exclusions that USTR did grant have now expired, with tariffs back in place on thousands of those imports. We still do not have an open exclusion process allowing importers to request relief and domestic producers to justify retaining the tariffs. That brings us to today. On May 12, 2023, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative announced the extension of 77 of the 81 COVID-related exclusions in the China Section 301 investigation that were scheduled to expire on May 15th. USTR originally granted those exclusions in December 2020 among those final issued. These are among the few exclusions still in effect and are now extended through September 30th of 2023. This will align with the only other exclusions not already expired, which I'll come back to in a minute. USTR allowed 4 exclusions to expire on May 31st, covering safety glasses and goggles, certain plastic bags, non-woven fabric, and face masks. USTR did extend through the remaining 77 through September 30th for products including packaging containers, single-use cold packs and hot packs, several single-use medical items, hand pumps, microscopes, blood pressure monitors, among others. In its notice extending the expiring exclusions, the Biden administration said that, quote, the U.S. Trade Representative has determined that extending these 77 exclusions is not likely to adversely harm domestic manufacturing of products covered by the exclusions, and extending through September 30th, 2023 will allow the U.S. Trade Representative to consider and align, as appropriate, the exclusions with the results of the statutory 4-year review. Let's examine that September 30th date a bit more, now that we have the last 2 groups of exclusions expiring that day in alignment. Speculation here in Washington, D.C. is that we could see a few things happen between now and then. As I mentioned, the U.S. Trade Representative is conducting a mandatory 4-year review of the Section 301 tariffs, which USTR announced the beginning of that review in July of 2022. Some in Washington are expecting some type of report from USTR this summer that they would issue related to their review of the Section 301 tariffs, and that report might also be accompanied by a public hearing this summer. Building on that speculation, we could also see some kind of announcement in August or September on the tariffs and the exclusion process. USTR will either allow those remaining exclusions to expire, extend them to December 31st to buy them more time to figure out what their actual China tariff policy is, or announce a new policy entirely. USTR may decide to lift tariffs on some imports, retain them on most, and make certain Chinese products eligible for tariff exclusion requests. As usual, a busy summer here in town. Let's jump over to Capitol Hill quickly for a quick update. The U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee on Chinese Communist Party began issuing some of the recommendations that they told us to expect over the course of this 118th Congress. On Wednesday, May 24th, the committee called on Congress to lower even further the $800 de minimis exemption level for goods that are not subject to tariffs or taxes. This is largely targeting the retail platforms, online retail platforms, and others who are circumventing the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Congress raised that de minimis standard from $200 to $800 back in 2016. That's something some lawmakers want to get reduced. The committee also recommended sanctions on Chinese technology companies and that Congress should pass legislation to restrict outbound investment to Chinese companies that, quote, support the Chinese Communist policies towards Uyghurs. These proposals, along with several other investment restrictions, are included in the first of 2 reports the committee released. The second set came with 10 recommendations with regards to Taiwan. The Select Committee's recommendations for Congress on Taiwan focus largely on defense and military strategies and capabilities and partnerships with other allies, but also included a suggestion that the U.S. and allies, quote, need to strengthen and better coordinate collective planning for how they will deter or would respond diplomatically and economically to a crisis over Taiwan. Lastly, from Capitol Hill, we are hearing that Congress is starting to consider a customs bill that with a big focus on enforcement, particularly on China enforced labor, and we will likely see some hearings possibly as early as June with regards to that. So a lot going on as always, and every summer it seems like with trade, particularly with China. That's the latest from here in Washington, D.C. As always, please let us know if you would like more information, particularly on the Section 301 exclusion process, what we could expect later on, and some of the other developments going on in the general trade policy area.